Hi everyone, I'm Karina Taylor from Sustainability, where we spill the tea on all things environmentalism. Today's episode is actually a two-parter, all about dirt. I know what you're thinking. Really? Dirt? That's what you're talking about? But stick with me, because there's actually so much to talk about. And by the end of this two-parter, you're going to have a new obsession, I promise. And it's gonna be dirt. Today is part 1. And it's all about composting, and part 2 will be on soil degradation. But first, what is a compost? How do I start one? Can I do that in an apartment, or is it just for people with big backyards? Abby Bender and Maddie Foley are joining me today, and we're going to get into all of these topics. Quick note before we start. Since recording this episode, I've gotten a new recording setup, which you're hearing now. So during the episode, I'll sound a little different, and I'll drop little notes throughout with this setup. Okay, let's start spilling the tea. Hi, welcome to Sustainability.
I'm Maddie.
I'm Abby.
I'm Karina. So today we're talking about dirt and soil, and there's a lot going on with dirt. So much that it's a two-parter. Our first two-parter.
Woo! Wait, is what's going on with dirt sexy?
I think dirt is sexy.
Awesome. I'm invested. All right, let's do it. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to ask.
So we're talking all about dirt, and there's a lot going on with dirt, more than I would have thought until I started researching. So today is all about composting. So composting is how dirt gets made. It's the how. And I was like doing this research, and I knew that I wanted my first episode to be about composting, to be about dirt, because I just love dirt.
What part of dirt? Like, you like walking in dirt? You like touching dirt?
What about dirt?
I had to really think about it, and
Is dirt a good talker?
Like when I was doing my research, and I was like, I want to do dirt. I knew that for a fact, but I had to really like do some soul searching and do some like internal digging. I think it's just because I learned about composting maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it just made me have so much more appreciation for this ubiquitous thing under our feet. It's just amazing. For me, truly, the reason I like dirt so much in composting is because composting is the one topic out of all of them that makes me really feel like I am part of the ecosystem and not separated from it. And I think that's an important lesson to be had in the environmental movement. And so I wanted to start off our conversation by asking you guys, is there anything that makes you feel like that? Like you're part of the ecosystem and not just separate from it?
I often feel very close to the natural world. If I'm like in a forest, there's something about being like, I feel like when you're in a forest, which I know you can't get everywhere in the world, but for me, it's like very calming being around like live trees that have fallen, decaying plants. You can see like the whole cycle in front of you on like a short hike. It makes it very clear because it's just like, I'm walking through the life cycle right now.
Yeah, that's actually that's a lot of what I feel too, and I don't have forests around me or anything. So I like how universal that feels. So we're going to be talking a lot about cycles because it is a cycle. How about you, Maddie?
Good question. Camping, which I do think is true because it does kind of remove you from the noises of humanity. But I also have to say that just being in like the water at the ocean, like if I'm just swimming and as soon as I don't feel the bottom of the sand, I'm like, oh, I'm just another prey creature. You know what I mean? Like I'm just another little animal in this big soup. And I think that that's calming in a way. I really like being in the water and like floating in it and, you know, exploring all the little nooks and crannies in like a little, like near the docks. But definitely, I never feel more part of the ecosystem when there is a chance it could be eaten.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. But that was beautiful. I loved hearing that from both of you guys. Hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll understand like why I say that about compost and that it really makes me feel like I'm part of the environment and like I'm part of a system greater than myself. But composting is how dirt is made. And here's a quick little definition. Composting is the aerobic breakdown of organic material into soil by microorganisms. So let's break that down. It's a little sciencey. So when I say organic material, or when we say organic in science, we're not talking about like the label on your grocery store lettuce. We're talking about things that have carbon in them. So life on Earth is carbon based. So when we say organic and when we say carbon, we're talking about things that are alive or have been alive. Microorganisms are creatures that are too small to see with your naked eye. You need a microscope, micro. And so these are things like bacteria, viruses, germs, stuff like that. And aerobic means oxygen. So anaerobic means no oxygen. So this is an aerobic system. So composting is when little creatures break down things that were living in a space with oxygen, where they have access to oxygen. Did that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, like mushrooms and worms and the like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is, it's going to get a little bit more sciencey today, but I'll break it down as much as I can.
Don't worry. I was a TA for a botany class in college.
Not to brag, but Abby was a TA for this kind of thing.
So a visual example I'll give of composting is kind of like what Abby was talking about, is when a tree loses leaves and those leaves fall to the ground. So you have a tree, you have the leaves, they fall to the ground, like I just said. And when those leaves fall, they fall into the dirt and onto the soil. And that has microorganisms. It also has other animals like worms and things. And it has a lot of oxygen. You have things like animals and squirrels running through, creating a lot of movement so that the whole pile of leaves gets exposure to this oxygen. And it also gets exposure to the ground, which has those microorganisms. Eventually, all the microorganisms and the movement, it all ends up with the leaves decomposing and turning back into dirt. That new dirt has the nutrients from the leaves, and those nutrients are now encompassed in the soil and the ground, and the tree and their roots suck up those nutrients. So it is a cycle. It is a literal cycle. There's a quote that I really liked from the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, the United States EPA, and it calls composting nature's way of recycling. And I think that's a really good way to think about it. When we recycle things, we have a material that has already been used and we're putting it back into production to be made into something new. That is essentially what composting is. You take food scraps or, dead leaves, grass clippings, and you're putting them back into nature to be made into dirt. So those nutrients go back into plants, which get eaten by animals, which get eaten by us. And it's all a cycle. And the purpose of that cycle is to keep nutrients where they belong. Now, I want you to keep visualizing this tree analogy that I keep bringing up. So what if we take those leaves and we rake them up and we put them in a plastic bag and then we put that bag into the trash bin and that goes into landfill? What do you think happens?
Now, why the hell would you do that? Now, why the hell would you go and do something like that?
There's no oxygen in the bag.
Well, you know what I really like? Because I'll talk about this with people because I get so mad when I see it. But here's the thing is that Just leave the leaves. They'll degrade.
Leave the leaves. Leave the leaves, please.
Once you put them in plastic, you completely disrupt that cycle. But it
I
looks
know.
bad.
But the curb appeal. But
the curb.
I know.
Oh, you're bringing down the profits value of all of this. Like, shut up.
I know.
God. Anyways, I don't feel good about it. Leave the leaves.
Leave the leaves. I don't like it either. And like, I mean, not only is those leaves like a home for lots of little animals like critters and bugs and things like that, like now they're homeless. And but now, like Abby was saying, there's no oxygen in that plastic bag. So what happens to that then? It goes into a landfill, and things don't actually decompose in landfills. At least organic material does not decompose in landfills because there's no oxygen.
When I was growing up, we put our leaves in paper bags.
Wow. We didn't have leaves because I grew up in the desert.
So I'll get back into what happens to organic material in the landfill in a minute, but also now those nutrients that need to go back into the soil to that tree are missing. So now this tree has less nutrients to suck up from its roots and to make more tree. And that's not good for the soil and the dirt. And then you do that for enough cycles and you get bad soil. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next episode, which is all about soil degradation, which goes into that and it goes into a little bit more. But like, yeah, now this cycle is disrupted. And that's kind of when it first started to click for me, where I was like, damn, I could like hurt the cycle. Like I could be part of the cycle. And I don't want to be part of that cycle in a bad way. I want to help. I want to be a good force.
You can be part of the solution, or you can be the problem.
And I think composting is one of the first places, or one of the easier places to see that. It's like, yeah, you could be part of the solution. You could help make more dirt, or you can, put the leaves in a plastic bag and put it in landfill.
Oh, well said.
So, what can be composted?
Let's get into it.
Very simple way to think about it is anything that comes from the earth can go back into the earth. So back to that organic material thing. Almost any...
We're just a couple of silly voices today. So sorry.
No, that's fine. For the audio-only listeners, you just missed Abby's interpretive dance on what, soil?
About continuations.
It was really pretty.
Continuing.
You incorporating that choreography into your next theater production?
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Asking with sincerity.
Yeah, I just a tangent for a moment. I was at the grocery store earlier, and I saw parchment paper that claimed to be compostable, but in my mind I was like, how does that work if you got like food on it from cooking? And it's like, I know you can't compost all foods, which like I don't know if you're gonna get into this, so like we don't have to go into it, but like I saw that earlier and I literally was like, how does that work?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's something that I think a lot of people will put their pizza boxes into recycling, not realizing that you can't recycle something with food waste on it, but you can absolutely compost it. So you can compost anything that comes from the earth,
even if it's like been processed, like a pizza.
Like a pizza, pretty much, because it's not like in that pizza example, you're pretty much just taking fat, or like crumbs, which are grains. You can put that in like a home compost. I don't have access to municipal composting. I wish I did. So I can't speak for all areas that do. But if you do have municipal composting, then they'll tell you, they'll have some sort of like regulations. So you can compost anything that comes from the earth, which for most of us, that what we see in our daily lives are going to be food waste, food scraps, like skins and things like that. And hi, oh my goodness.
I could compost him too.
No,
You can, and I get into that. It's
Let's get into
I'm
it.
glad I'm not the one. Man, this is gonna be a to edit. We're going all over the place, but you know what? That's fine. That's how we do it here. Hi, editing Karina here. This was hard to edit. I mean, we went in so many different directions, and we're not gonna get into decomposing dead bodies today. Sorry. We did, but we're going to save that conversation for a whole episode in the future on green post-death burial cremation alternatives and plans. So yeah, hopefully you're looking forward to hearing something like that. I'm into it. Maybe you're into it. If you are, join us in the future. All right, back to the program. So it gets a little bit harder when it comes to animal products. I'm not talking about shark, I'm talking about like food. So like pretty much all plant products you can compost. So any sort of like ground coffee, tea leaves, stale bread, even things that are a little bit moldy, like if they have like a white mold on them, it's fine. If it's like black mold, keep that out of your compost. But if it's a little bit moldy, that's also part of the decomposition process. You can compost that. When it comes to animal products, eggshells you can easily compost in your backyard compost. And I'm going to talk about what a backyard compost is and how to do all these in a second. But just so we have a base, eggshells are pretty much the only animal product that you can easily compost in your home. When it comes to meat and bones, those things are a little bit more complicated. And when it comes to things like pet poop, you do not want to compost that in your home. And the reason for that is because a lot of these things can be, well, they're hard to break down in your home because it's hard to kind of set up the right environment for that. There are professionals who do this all day long and they specialize in that. So that's more for like municipal composting that says they can compost meat and bones. When it comes to things like raw meat and pet poop, that's a health hazard. And there's pathogens in those things, and so that can get into your soil. And if you're putting that soil in like your garden, that can kill things in your garden. So it's more, you kind of want to keep plant products and eggshells in your home compost, and then animal products, that goes somewhere else. That either goes in landfill, which in that case would be the most responsible place to put it, or it goes into municipal composting that says they can compost those things. Hi, it's me again. So I've mentioned municipal composting a couple of times already, but I haven't defined it yet. So municipal composting is essentially composting done by the government, by your municipality. So the same way that you put your trash in your bins and you put them on the curb, so that way the government can pick it up, that's the idea here. In municipal composting, you would have a bin that you put your compostables in, and then you just bring it out into the curb along with your other bins, like your recycling and your trash. Back to the episode. But it's not just food that we can compost, it's also things like paper and cardboard. When you're composting and you have compost material, we separate compostables into brown things and green things. Have you guys heard of this? No?
No. I'm just thinking about the fact that I've definitely seen compostable dog poop bags, and I'm like, I'm not going to be taking that all the way to a municipal place. What's the point of that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have one, so I don't know if it would be more convenient, but I feel like you'd have to like freeze that poop, unless you have like a bin at home.
The way I mean, the way I always thought of it is that if I get the compostable bags and they end up in the landfill, at least the compostable bags and the shit. Sorry, sorry, cursed. Will will like degrade themselves if nothing.
But like
else.
we're talking about, like if they're covered, they won't get the oxygen it needs to decompose. So like it might not if decompose.
No, but if the bag itself degrades.
Yeah, what I'm saying, the bag it won't because it's not getting oxygen
Why?
because it doesn't get the oxygen in a landfill.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so nothing really decomposes in a landfill.
I see.
Yeah. So the benefit I see there is that it probably isn't made of fossil fuels like petroleum-based plastics are. So it probably still is a better choice. It's just not going to compost.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to look more into that. I feel like I've seen my mom use them, but I have no idea off the top of my head.
So the one thing I wanted to mention before we get into that, because that's like the next topic I want to cover right now, is this green and brown stuff. So brown stuff is the carbon-rich items, and green stuff is the is the nitrogen-rich items. So brown stuff would be things like dead leaves and dry, like cardboard, paper, things that are a little bit older, and then green stuff. So those are things like food scraps, like skins, seeds, peels, things like that. And in my head, they're wet, so wet stuff, because I've been composting for a little bit, and they get your compost wet, and then the brown stuff dries it up. That's in my head how I think of it, and that's how visually it looks.
Can you compost paper and cardboard that has ink on it?
So that's a little more interesting. When I personally do, and nothing has happened, like nothing bad has happened. If you put it in recycling, it goes through a de-inking process. So if you're not sure, you can recycle paper and cardboard with ink on it. I have put it in my compost and I get dirt. I think so. What I've learned from composting, and I have not perfected it, but I've been doing it for a couple of years, is that your compost is a lot hardier than you think it is. Okay. I feel pretty comfortable judging what can and can't go in compost. And if I get it wrong, it'll be gross, but it won't explode. And you gotta have a balance of these brown and green things. 3/4 of it should be brown stuff, and then 1/4 should be green stuff. Before I get too far, in case the audience has trouble visualizing what composting looks like, it's essentially putting all this stuff in a pile outdoors in a place with oxygen and having it break down. There's a couple different ways you can do it, and I'll go into that soon. But if you don't have that balance and you have too many green things, because that's the mistake I have done, where you have, because I eat a lot of fruits and veggies and stuff like that, and then I just dump it in compost and I don't think about the brown stuff. I'm not thinking about like collecting the brown stuff, and you have to break it apart to a certain extent. If you put a whole coconut in your compost, that's gonna take years. Don't do that. You can break it up. But if you have too much green stuff, you will get bugs. It will smell. It will turn liquidy. It will attract roaches. I speak from personal experience. Don't do that. It's horrible. And people don't like it. People don't like it when you start stinking up the house with your freaking slimy compost bin.
Where do you find the more brown stuff? Because I feel like you would just have more access to green stuff. Like you said, the fruits and veggies and stuff.
Yeah, that's why that's the mistake I've made before, because I do have more easy access to it. I'm lucky enough that I have a big backyard, so I just take palm leaves and stuff and things like that, or I put cardboard and I put paper in there, and I have put things with ink on it, and it's been fine. And I feel comfortable doing that. Maybe you wouldn't if you're a beginner, but I feel like it can take it. The earth is pretty hardy. But I'm imagining someone living in an apartment, I would think paper is probably the biggest source. And things like your toilet paper roll, you don't want to put used toilet paper in there. That's gross. Flush that down the toilet. But But like thin papers like that, like paper towel, you can't recycle paper towel because it's really thin. You can chuck that in the compost. Pizza boxes in the compost. Um, Anything that, or like any sort of takeout boxes, once they have food on them, or like once they're soiled with food, not like with like poop. Like don't like I said, don't put
Not
your
with
toilet.
human feces. Ew. Anyways.
No, but like once they're soiled with food, you can put that in your compost. So I don't live in an apartment, so like does any of this sound relevant to you guys, or can you guys think of any other brown stuff that you can find in your lives?
Oh. Yeah, cardboard,
Mm-hmm.
newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
mail.
My mom sends me a lot of packages. So probably boxes from cardboard. But how do you, I don't know if, I know you don't live in an apartment, so I don't know if we're going to cover this, but like, how would you have a big backyard, but like, how would you do this if you're in an apartment?
So there are a few ways to do an apartment. Actually, one thing I just thought of, another thing is those biodegradable products you see. Those, a lot of those are probably brown stuff because they're probably drier. But back to your question. Let's see. I have a few things. All right, you're going to tell me how realistic this is. This is from the internet. Okay. So, because like the way I compost is a little bit different than how you compost an apartment. First thing, you can buy a machine. Something like I think Ninja has something. The one I know most about it's called Lomi. Lomi is the name of the product. And I've seen a few other like Instagram ads, but
Yeah, I feel like I've seen videos on TikTok or something of like a composting machine. Those are wild.
the problem with these products are, and I'm not saying this is the only option for apartments, like there are other options, but the problem with these products is that they're really expensive. The Lomi is like $400-$500. That's a lot. And so the idea is that you put your food scraps in this little machine, and then it like runs for like maybe like 4 to 8 hours, or like overnight. And then you get like, I think you also have to like put like a powder in it or something, and then you get this like, it's not even dirt. It's really just like processed food products, and it's more of a pre-compost. So if you are in an apartment and you just have houseplants and you like cover your houseplants in them, it's probably not going to make it grow because just the surface area, like like you can probably load. Does that make sense? Like, does my thinking make sense? If you put it in a potted plant, it's not enough soil in there to actually make it compost.
Yeah, since it's like a pre-compost.
Yeah, it's kind of like a pre-compost. So you would want to put that in the dirt so that it actually composts. I can see how that could be useful for someone, but I also think it's just like it's $400 and you're not even composting, you know? So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for someone in an apartment, but that's kind of like what they were made for, right? And there's also something called a worm bin. Stick with me.
I love
Stick
worm
with me.
bins.
Have you used one? Do you have one or anything like that?
I know about
You
them.
know about them.
I know about them.
I'm imagining a bin full of worms.
He would be correct.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Bingo.
Dirt
And worms. And you can buy these worms online. I didn't know this, but I actually would be open to trying this. But it's a bin,
But like, how big?
and I mean I've seen some bins be like big, like a bin, like I don't know. But I've also seen them be I don't know, like a moving bin or something. But I've also seen them be pretty small, where I mean I guess it's whatever you can fit in, like I don't know, under your sink or something.
Oh,
I think
okay.
yeah.
I was imagining much bigger than that.
No, I've seen people do it in pretty small spaces. Yeah, I haven't tried it, but I have seen people in apartments
Does it
in like
smell?
urban cities. According to them, no. I haven't tried this, but like according to them it doesn't smell because it's dirt and it's worms, and they eat it really fast. It's a really fast way to compost. And compost is not supposed to smell bad, by the way. If you're doing it correctly, it just smells like earth. And if you're doing it incorrectly, it smells like hell. It smells like farts. It smells like booty. Like, it smells worse. And just like it just smells like rotten food and like farts. If you're doing it wrong, it smells really bad. But like, the goal is not to do it wrong. The goal is to do it right. Like, so the worms tend to be pretty reliable, and it tends to be a good option for apartments because it doesn't smell. It's quick because it doesn't take a lot of your day. You just like dump it, and you're not necessarily turning it like you would other options. So let me go into some of the other options. Right before we get into different types of composting, let's backtrack. We already know things can't compost in landfill because it's not the right environment for decomposition. But when compostables inevitably end up in a landfill, what happens then? So when food goes into a landfill, or when, compostable products go into a landfill, they create methane, which is a greenhouse gas. And we talked about, I'm not sure we mentioned
that's what cows fart.
That's what cows burp. At least that's what I heard on the internet. I heard it's like, it's not the farting, it's the burping.
Oh, but, shoot. I think you're right, actually. Wait, I think I did see that too.
But cow gas, yeah. So I'm not sure if we talked about the greenhouse effect in the last episode, or like greenhouse gases in the last episode.
We like brushed over it really briefly, but we didn't really go into it. We kind of just talked about carbon.
Okay. So the greenhouse effect is essentially you have gases in the atmosphere that trap heat, and so the atmosphere acts like a greenhouse. And that's a good thing unless you have too many greenhouse gases. That's when we start seeing warming, like bad warming, like too much warming. And so greenhouse gases are the ones trapping the heat. The main greenhouse gas that we usually talk about is carbon dioxide, or CO2. But it's not the only one. There's also methane. Methane is really dangerous because it is a lot more, I guess, it's a lot better of a greenhouse gas. It traps heat a lot better than carbon dioxide does. And so it traps a lot more per volume of carbon dioxide. So MIT says that methane can trap 120 times as much heat as CO2. 120 times. So now that we know about methane, a little extra context on cows and methane. According to PBS News, livestock, like cows, produce 40% of the methane in the atmosphere, and 89% of that is in their burps. This methane builds up in their guts from their diet, and then they burp it. Scientists are actually trying to do something about this. A study done in the University of California, Los Angeles, or UCLA, found that adding 3 ounces of red seaweed in cattle feed reduced their methane emissions by 82%. They say they're doing this because demand for animal products is on the rise globally. They don't mention this in the news story, but we have to acknowledge that part of the solution should also be reducing animal agriculture, which means reducing our consumption of animal products. That doesn't mean we all have to be vegetarian or vegan, but it would be irresponsible of us as educators to neglect that truth. So when you think about like your food waste, and it's not like people are throwing away whole meals or anything in the trash, but like think about like when you're cutting onions, the skin, if that goes to the trash, or like your leftovers that went bad, that goes to the trash, bread that went moldy, that goes to the trash. All of this adds up. And once you start paying attention to it, it's really hard not to notice how much organic material goes to landfill. And we talk a lot about food waste just because it is the most visual and it's what we encounter a lot of. And it's also it's an aspect of our lives that we can greatly reduce. Food waste in landfills is the 3rd largest source of human-made methane emissions. And in 2017, they made up 14% of all methane emissions. That's from like apple cores and even things like paper going to landfill and stuff like that. That's big. And the USDA estimates that 30 to 40% of food produced in the United States is wasted. Can you imagine that? All of that creating all that methane that's warming the planet. And we talk about CO2 and carbon dioxide a lot, but there's like methane is a problem. It's a problem that we have a lot of control over because, CO2, that's kind of hard. That's kind of hard for individuals to do, but composting, I mean, that's another reason why I like composting so much. It's a place where individuals have a lot of impact, or we can have a lot of positive impact. It's just like, and I think of that every time I like put something compostable into the trash, because sometimes my compost is like backed up, like I can't, like it's full or whatever. And I'll talk a little bit more about my composting and composting methods now. But it's not just the emissions and things that I think about, but it's also the nutrients that are being lost. Like we have so much goes into the food that we produce from an actual human, like touching and raising this food. And then it goes into transportation. That's more fossil fuels being put into the environment and stuff with transportation. And then it needs to be stored, it needs to be refrigerated and things. So that's a lot of energy. And then for all that energy to be put into a food, and then for that food to go to landfill, and for all those nutrients to be lost, it hurts my heart. I think about that every single day. I really do, because like I cook a lot and things like that. And so it's just like it's something that's very visual and just very in your face once you learn about these things and once you start paying attention to them. And composting is, I don't know, I kind of think of it as like a form of protest a little bit because it's like, wow, all of this stuff is happening and you can actually do something about it. It's not a problem that is so abstract. It's something that's very solid that you can actually see visually that you're making a difference. And now let's get into types of composting. So have you guys ever thought about, like, ever tried composting?
I haven't had the chance to really get into it.
Okay.
Well, I think my mom has like a little kitchen one because I think they might have.
Oh, that's nice.
I don't know how their trash system works, but I definitely think my mom at least used to use like a little kitchen countertop or like to collect scraps.
Kind of. I just never really had the space. But my family has a compost bin at home.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what my parents have. They have like these compostable like one pot, like one coffee cup Keurigs kind of now, where it's made to be compostable. You just throw it in there. And then there's like a greater compost. At least in Napa County, there's compost options, and I don't think that they're limited by because she puts meat in there and everything.
Oh, that's awesome. That would be the ideal for everyone to have curbside municipal composting. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Because like composting, it can be a lot of work, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's the worm bins and stuff like that, also called vermi composting. It's a worm bin. I'm just gonna call it a worm bin. Worms. And so more for like that could work for apartments and things like that. There's also an option where, municipal composting, if you have that, that's great. And so sometimes you can put compost in your freezer, you can freeze it, and then you can find a place to do it. You can find someone else to compost for you. So you could do this either at a farmer's market. Maybe you find some farmers there and you build a relationship with them and you're like, hey, here's my compost. Some companies will do that for you. Some companies will kind of take the place of municipal composting and will collect your compost. It's not free. I would love some sort of government-backed municipal composting that your taxes will pay for and you don't really have to, pay any additional. Now, if you have a backyard, you have a few more options. So you have like, if I don't know if you've ever seen a tumbler, like a compost tumbler.
Mm-hmm.
So it's essentially, they can look like a few different things, but the most common one I've seen is it's a bin on legs, and you can like roll it kind of, or like flip it, all right? And so that gets all the air coming in, and I think you should put a little bit of dirt in there to get those, those microorganisms in there. Now the problem with this, I have found from personal experience, I got a cheap one from Amazon. Maybe there are better ones, but the holes are too small. So you can put things in there, but to take them out is really hard. And so things just kind of build up. Is that like what your mom has, Maddie? Like a, oh no, you said she has like a.
She has the countertop, but I lived in a roommate situation where in the backyard they had one of those giant tumblers.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you ever use it, or was that more like your roommate?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a household thing, so we would have like a little compost thing on the counter, then we'd go out and we'd dump it in there.
Okay, that's how I do it too. I put it in my freezer, and then once I have the time or whatever, I put it in the tumbler. But I don't use tumbler anymore. And so there's also something called trench composting, which is what I have been doing recently. And you dig a big hole in the ground, and you put your stuff in it, and then you just put the dirt back on. Yeah, it's not like you're in a landfill. Dirt isn't like super tightly packed or anything, but you do want to put a little bit of dirt on it because you don't want animals to get to it. And it has been very successful. I do this near a tree because you want to do it nearby some sort of plants that can use those nutrients. And it's a fruit tree that I have, so I like to think that my fruit are better now because of me. And it's crazy because once you start doing that, the dirt gets really dark. It gets like black, like pitch black, and it's really beautiful because you compare it to the dirt around it, and it's like gray and dry, and that's probably dirt that isn't as nutrient dense, right? And then now it's like nice and dark and rich. And another thing you can compost that I forgot to mention up top was you can compost fabrics that are made of plant-based materials like hemp or like 100% cotton. You don't want to put anything that is a mix that has some sort of like nylon or any sort of plastic fabric in there, but you can compost clothing. But back to trench composting. So the problem with trench composting is that it's not like I'm going to do this every day. So I have a bin in my freezer and I just wait for it to get filled up, and then you have to dig this hole, and like digging a hole is a lot of labor. So if you're disabled or you have any sort of like joint issues, things like that, anything like, or just you don't have the time, or you're just not very physically fit, that's like really hard work to be digging this deep hole, because you want it to be fairly deep, like maybe like a foot deep, and it takes a lot of time, and it's hot. Like to be outside and sweating and stuff like this, I don't do it as much as I should, just because there's a couple of those things in the way.
I wonder how people living in colder areas would be able to do that, like when it gets not summertime and it's like in places that snow.
Actually, that is why the people at Lomi made thing for cold weather. But I don't actually know how people, because presumably people are still, well, this is my thinking. I think that presumably they would have to do something, especially in societies or in the past that just don't have the same kind of waste management systems that we have today. I think that's why a lot of colder climates have a lot of fermented foods and a lot of like pickling and things like that, because you have to save food for the winter, and you don't have a way to manage that kind of waste. So you have to do something with it. And I think people back then were just it took a lot more resources to make things, and you are more involved in the making of those things. So maybe it's just that they were producing a lot less waste and they had a lot less to deal with. I really don't know. This is just me thinking, but that would be really cool to look into.
Yeah.
I did find a hack online. and I want to do this. I want to try this. This sounds really cool. I saw this thing online. This guy took a bucket and he drilled holes on the sides and on the bottom. And he dug a hole and he put the bucket in the hole. And then he put the lid on it. And so it's surrounded by dirt. Oh, you just open it and you put your compostables in it. And like the worms can still get in and you still have your air. But then you put the lid on and the animals don't get to it. It's genius to me. It sounds so genius because it's the trench compost without having to dig the hole every single time. So I want to try that out. I want to see if it actually works, or maybe it's just, a flop, but I want to try that out. So hopefully I'll have some sort of feedback in a few weeks. And it's a lot of labor up front, but it's not something that you would have to continue. So, and there's also something called a compost pile, which is kind of like trench composting, but you're not really digging. You're just putting it in a pile and you're covering it with things like leaves. So you're making layers, and there are certain kind of formulas, like you do like your greens, and then you do your browns, and you kind of layer them. I'm assuming one of the reasons why is because you don't want animals getting into your food and stuff. The problem, well, not the problem, but like the thing with that is you do have to turn it. You have to move it so that it gets oxygen. So depending on, again, disabilities or time or, lots of other factors, that could be kind of difficult for someone to keep up with too. I'm all for municipal composting. I want someone else to do this for me. But at the same time, I really do enjoy being part of the process. I really do enjoy seeing that happen. And when you make dirt, it's such a pride-inducing moment when you're like, I made this dirt. I have photos of dirt that I've made. I posted on my Instagram story years ago. I was like, look at this dirt, I made it. And it feels really good knowing that your nutrients are going back into the soil. And whenever, this is silly, but whenever I like buy something new at a farmer's market, I'm like, ooh, new nutrients going into my soil. Like they haven't seen this before. And but I also have a backyard, so I kind of see, the results of that, and I see that going into the ecosystem. And I do have like fruit trees and stuff, so I can be pretty involved in it, and so I really like that. But if you're in an apartment, I can imagine just having municipal composting would be amazing, but it's not available everywhere. And do you guys have any questions?
What kind of prep goes into a worm bin? Because I know that there's more than just getting dirt and putting worms in it.
That's a good question.
Let me see. I didn't get that detailed into my notes, but I think to my knowledge, it's really just putting some holes in it. So this is from my knowledge, right? Just from like my few years of like looking into this and stuff like that. You want some air, you want some holes in there so that way these worms don't suffocate, and you want it to be in an environment that is not too hot or they'll die. From my knowledge, it's not that complicated or that difficult. It just needs to be done in the right place. Like that's why it's so good for apartments, because you want to do this indoors. You don't want to leave a compost like a worm bin outside in 80-degree, 90-degree weather where it's even hotter in the bin.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I'm also looking, and of course this is just a quick Cornell composting thing, but basically you'll want to use about 50 pages of newspaper to tear into 1/2 to 1 inch strips, and place those in a large plastic garbage bag or container. Add water until bedding feels like a damp sponge, moist but not dripping. Add the dry strips if it gets too wet, and then add the strips to the bin. Make sure bedding is fluffy and not packed down to provide air for the worms. Bin should be 3/4 full of wet newspaper strips. Then you sprinkle 2 to 4 cups of soil in bin, which introduces beneficial microorganisms. Gritty soil particles also aids the worm's digestive process. Potting soil or soil from outdoors is fine. Then you add the worms, and then you bury the food scraps. Okay.
Yeah.
So pretty much just like similar process as to like getting your crop beds ready for the summer.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I forgot that. Yeah, you usually do have some sort of newspaper or cardboard or something at the bottom to kind of base this. And there was one more thing that you said that it brought up something in my mind. You have to wet it. So I forgot this because I usually don't have to worry about this in my compost. You have to water it occasionally. The reason I don't have to worry about this is because it tends to just get watered from the fruits and vegetables that I put in there. I never really have dry compost, but if you do have dry compost, you might need to water it on occasion. It's about finding that balance, and it's about learning your compost. Like, I can tell you how to compost, but not until you really do it are you going to understand it. And then you start to really learn how to communicate with your compost and with your dirt, and it's crazy. It's like having a relationship. You start reading it and you start learning like what it needs and how to balance it, and it's all about finding balance. And you'll know that you're finding balance once you start getting dirt. Once it starts smelling earthy, it doesn't smell bad, it doesn't attract bugs or anything like that. You just got to experiment with it a little bit. And like I said, compost is hardy. So I find that it's hard to ruin your compost. Usually you can fix it somehow. Most of the time, if things are a little too wet or they're starting to get a little gross, you add more brown stuff. Or if things are getting dry, you add some water, you add some green stuff. You can play with it. And the last thing I want to talk about was a little bit of advocacy, because I love advocacy. One thing you can do is for sure reducing your food waste so that it doesn't go into landfill and it doesn't create the methane that we were talking about. So do you guys make an effort to reduce your food waste, or what do you do if you're trying to reduce your food waste?
I mean, I'm cooking for one, so I don't really do super huge bulk shopping trips. I usually just get the things that I need the day of, and that's
Mm-hmm.
at the current amount like of money I make in the space that I have. It's about the best I can do. I buy like glass when I can instead of plastic
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to like peanut butter jars or packaging. I try to look for like things that aren't completely wrapped up in plastic if I can help it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's the market is so oversaturated with plastic products
Yeah.
that it
Mm-hmm.
can be difficult to find those things. But I try to do it where I can. Local co-ops are nice; those are good options as well for
Mm-hmm.
reducing just the whole.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So if you have one, hit it up.
Yeah. I love that you're not doing these huge bulking trips if you just don't need to. I think I mean, not only does it save money, but I think we just have a big overconsumption problem, and sometimes that goes into food. And you buy so much food, you end up not eating it, and it goes to waste. Creating this methane and stuff like that. Abby, did you want to say something?
Oh, just like along similar lines, like I have really struggled in the past with like overconsumption, like purchasing foods. Um, but Keaton, my fiance, recently moved back from Japan, where the like culture of buying food over there, like for meals, is just very different. So you buy it
Mm-hmm.
like kind of how Maddie was describing, where you're buying it more as you go. And like
Mm-hmm.
he's like, now I don't know how to not do that. So we've kind of been transitioning to that because he cooks most of my dinners, and I'm okay with that. And we do still love our Costco trips, but we tend to try to only buy things that are like shelf stable or like
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
or like just like non-food items.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, my best friend lives in Japan, and he tells me the same thing, that you don't buy like huge grocery trips like that. You buy what you need, or he eats out a lot and things like that. There are a few other ways that I have written down to reduce your food waste. It's to learn how to properly store your food so that they're not going bad, so they last longer, so you get to eat them. And just like little hacks and tricks online, you'll find that, like taking your carrots and chopping them, putting them in a jar of water, or learning how to make your herbs like last as long as possible, because herbs wilt so fast in my house. There's also learning how to consume a lot of the food that you would waste. So what I mean by that is, like, you're cooking onions and garlic and stuff like that, or you have like carrot tops and carrot like skins and things. You take all that, simmer it for like 30 minutes, you got a broth. Now you don't have to buy broth, and that can still go into compost, but now there's been another use for it. Or things like like broccoli, like the stems of broccoli. If you buy like a big broccoli, not the ones that are cut up, like that big stem, that's edible. Like a lot of these things are like, there's definitely more parts of vegetables that are edible than you may realize, and you can eat those. Those don't have to go into waste. And also, like, shopping for things that are ugly, those things surprisingly go to waste a lot. So like the single banana or like the ugly tomato that made it to the store, a lot of stores don't even get those kind of produce. So if one slid past, pick it up. There's also things like Maddie was saying, co-ops, and there are companies that will like get all those things that are too ugly to sell to. Who would have thought that grocery stores are actually rejecting food for being too ugly? That's crazy. Like, I just want to eat it. Like,
the beauty standard, am I right?
The beauty standard on produce.
God, like it or not, this is what the ideal banana looks like. Yeah.
And like, but like, these are real foods going to waste. And so there are companies like Misfit Markets or Imperfect Produce that will take those and sell them to you. And there's also a little bit of local advocacy you can do. So you can contact your local waste management department and you can ask them, hey, can I get municipal composting? Can that happen, please? And I did this maybe 2 years ago. I sent them an email and I just, I just Googled Miami-Dade County waste management and I got the email. It's public information. And I emailed them and I was like, hi, I would really like to compost our municipal composting. Can I have some information about this? Are there any plans to implement this? And they got back to me in a few days. They, forwarded to the right person. They got me in contact with the right person. And they actually said that we are currently doing research at the University of Florida to make this happen. So hopefully, it's been a few years. So this has taken a long time, but hopefully we will be getting municipal composting in the future. Hopefully it won't be in 20 years, but hopefully it will happen. And they were really nice about it. And I didn't have to really talk to anyone. I just sent an email. So how are you guys feeling? Any questions? Anything you want to try?
I'm going to have to start sneaking the idea of a worm bin to my conversations with my fiance for when we move into our actual apartment.
Let me know how that goes.
I was just going to say, because that'd be something I'd be down to try.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it too, because it just sounds, at least in the hot summer months, that sounds a lot more doable than this trench composting I've been doing. I haven't perfected my composting yet. But I'd like to see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I was looking it up on my phone, and it looks like the area I'm in does have municipal composting. Like, I'm in Seattle, and it seems like they've had, like, decent, really good composting since, like, 2005.
That's awesome.
But, like, but I will be living in an apartment building,
mm-hmm.
like an apartment complex building, so I got to figure out what their trash systems are like.
Yeah, definitely. Keep us updated. And also, if you do talk to Keaton about the worm bin, let me know how that goes, because I'm an environmentalist. I would do anything to make more dirt. I love the worms. I will put the worms in my house, but like someone who's not really into dirt like me, like what would they think about that? I would love to know. So that was part 1 of our soil 2-parter. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and come back for part 2 all about soil degradation. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at sustainability.pod, spelled sustainability. Visit our website, sustainabilitypodcast.com, for show notes with our sources and more. Like the show? You can support it by buying us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/sustainability.pod. Again, our name is spelled everywhere, Sustainability EA. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye! This episode of Sustainability was researched and produced by me, Karina Taylor. Our hosts are Abby Bender, Maddie Foley, and Karina Taylor. Our artwork was done by our graphic designer, Margaret Degnan, and the music you heard throughout the episode was created by Maddie Foley.